Pastor's Heart, and Dominic Steele here, and over the last few weeks on the Pastor's Heart we've been talking about the task, so much change management for us as pastors and for our churches, but today we're talking about us as leaders, us and our teams, and us and the Lord Jesus. Our guests on the Pastor's Heart, Kirsty Bucknell, and Kirsty, of course, an organisational psychologist, and Greg Lee, Senior Pastor of Hunter Bible Church in Newcastle. Thanks for joining us, Greg.
My pleasure.
We'll come to them in just a moment, but before we do, can I ask you to help us out with the Pastor's Heart? We're aiming to see this ministry become self-sustaining, to pay the small crew who work for us on it, and if you were able to help us out by going to patreon.com/thepastor's-heart, then that would be great. Now, Greg, can I start with you and the Pastor's Heart, and what has God been doing on your heart in this season of COVID-19?
A couple of things. I think I've learned a bit about my own personality. So I discovered that when all this happened, I got really excited. I discovered that I'm largely an activist, and so I went straight into go mode, all the things that we have to do, and then was basically running on adrenaline. So I realized that I'm an adrenaline runner. Spiritually, I think over the last few weeks, I think I've rediscovered my eschatology, if you like. I've rediscovered that really what Christianity is about is a promise of heaven. And for a lot of my Christian life, I've been turning Christianity into what will happen now. So building a church, seeing people saved, all of the things that are very much now and aren't bad, but this has, I think, taught me to hope in heaven. They're the kind of big lessons. I think I've also learned how fearful I am for my people. You know, I think we're all thinking when we're at church normally on a Sunday and people aren't there, we notice. When people go dark on the internet, we can't see it. And so I just have this fear that in this time we're losing a bunch of people very quietly. And I'm more anxious about that than I expected to be.
This rediscovering eschatology, is it because of the increased focus on death and I might die, we might die, or something else?
It's funny, yeah, I don't think it's about suffering necessarily. I think it's about busyness and the expansiveness of life being taken away. So as life has gotten smaller and less busy, I think it's made me think more about purpose. Whereas I think I'm just very busy most of the time, very much in go mode, grow church, evangelize, all those things. It's not so much suffering as narrowing that's made me think more about heaven.
Now, what about the hearts of both your team and I know you network with, I don't know, a dozen or so pastors through the Reach Australia movement, and you're in close contact with them. What's going on in the hearts of others that you're close to?
I think I'd say the people who came into this fairly robust, the teams that came in strong and united have by and large been pretty resilient. They've seen a struggle, they've had the tools to adapt. I think the people who've come into this, say, struggling with mental illness, or the teams that are struggling with disunity, even the marriages that are struggling, this has just added a weight on top of it. So most of the teams and the pastors I've been talking to have actually coped really, really well. And our team has coped really well, but the people who are already struggling with something like health have found it much, much harder.
Now, Kirsty, you're kind of the woman of the moment in that, I mean, a while ago when I heard you were investigating, researching, helping us with mental health, with resilience and mental health, I thought, that's going to be good for lots of us, but now it feels like it's good for all of us.
Absolutely. There are a number of people out there who are certainly working in this space, thinking about how we can support people who are in ministry with their resilience, thinking about how we get through situations of burnout, stress and anxiety. But certainly it's something that's come up, and it's a way that we can start to... It's become something that is front of mind for more people because they've got more demands placed on them, not just the standard demands that you have in ministry, but a whole range of other demands that have been placed on them.
I mean, for most of us, we've all had our job descriptions thrown out the window and been on a steep learning curve of a whole lot of new things and then just even the way we function as a team. What's your key piece of advice for senior pastors now, particularly as we deal with those of us, our team members?
Look,
or ourselves and our team members,
Yeah, look, I think the place to start is to begin with yourself, to think about your own resilience and to think a bit about how you're coping with this current situation. Because the things that you're doing now, the sorts of coping strategies that you're using are being modelled to your team. And the more resilient you're able to be, you're actually demonstrating to them, teaching them how to be resilient as well. We're seeing in the research, people will have heard about the balancing out resources and demands, making sure that when you have additional demands, that the way we're talking about in our research is not just thinking about the resources that you have, although they're fantastic to have, but also what are the other capacities that you have for being resilient? So what are the coping strategies that you use? What are the beliefs that you have about your ability to be resilient around the world? What God can bring to you to help you in this situation as well?
What are you doing, Greg, in terms of both managing it for yourself and then encouraging your team? Because you've got quite a large team up there.
Yeah, there's 24 on team. In terms of myself, I've been reading the Bible more regularly than I ever have. And partly that's because very early on, I started putting my quiet times on a Facebook group for church. Because what I could sense was people wanted to feel closer to their pastor. And I thought, well, one of the ways I can do that is I can put on every day the things that I'm praying about and the Bible reading that I'm doing. And that's actually just forced me to be a lot more consistent, knowing that people are going to notice if I don't put it up. But it's been brilliant for my own faith. I've been reading through Deuteronomy and then Joshua and now into Judges, reading the Bible in a year plan. The consistency of doing that every single morning has been enormously helpful. And it's so prosaic. We've been taught that for decades. But sitting and reading the Bible and praying every morning has been brilliant.
So how do you do that? You just read it aloud, the passages, and then you make a couple of reflections, or have you looked at a commentary first, or what's your approach there?
No, it's pretty lo-fi. So I'm doing a read the Bible in a year plan. It starts with what I'm reading today, and then the 4 passages, and then I'll put fairly personal reflections. So I wanted something that was intimate, that was regular, that was digestible, and that was vulnerable. So I'm pretty regularly confessing weaknesses, character flaws in it, and it's a long way from being self-flagellating, but it's definitely not a sermon. I wanted people to feel closer to me, and it's funny, the staff have been jumping on that as much as everyone else has. My sense was people want a clear big vision and message, but they also want their pastors sitting close to them at this time. And that was one way to do that.
What else have you been doing in terms of, I'm thinking about the team members.
Pretty early on, I sat down and thought pretty hard about who do they need me to be, and came up with a bunch of twin roles that I needed to play with them. So they needed me to be the person who, at the same time, was decisive and leading the team and saying, this is where we're heading and I'm not anxious about this, but also collaborative and saying, I want you to join us. They needed to see me being both of those people. They needed to see me taking responsibility and saying, whatever bad stuff happens, it'll land on me, but also saying to them that I'm trusting you. They needed to see me being assured, God's got this, I feel like I'm in control, but also vulnerable. I'm struggling as well. Effectively, what I felt
sounds
like
paradoxical. How did those last two?
They're all those things, aren't they? They're all paradoxes, and I think it's because the person who's decisive but not collaborative is just going to run the show and alienate everyone. The person who's responsible but doesn't entrust, again, is just going to narrow everything down. The one who's really assured and bulletproof, it's hard to follow that person, isn't it? It's practically impossible. Really what I wanted to do was show them a fully orbed Christian walking through this at the head of their team so that they go, okay, well, things are okay. Jesus is leading us and Greg hasn't fallen off the perch. It's exactly what Kirsty was saying about modeling a kind of resilience and a biblical reflection. So the quiet time thing has been where I've said, here's where I'm failing. Here's where I've discovered about myself. We've given a lot of time in our staff meetings to helping people just reflect aloud and giving space for people to be really different. So initially talking about the people who went straight into go mode, hero mode, versus the people who are feeling paralyzed, and celebrating the fact that the ones who were in hero mode initially are now running out of steam, but the ones who initially were a bit paralyzed are now hitting their straps. So one of our staff he was in tears with me a couple of times in the first week, and I'd never seen him cry. We did a check of how did you feel 5 weeks ago? How do you feel now? And he said, now I'm great because I know what life holds now. I'm on top of things. I feel like there's a routine. Being able to celebrate the difference in the team and acknowledge those differences and explore them has been a really helpful thing for people because they haven't felt like they have to be one person.
I think those differences are really helpful both for senior ministers and for them to explore with their staff teams as well, to think through, particularly at this point in time, what is it about this new situation that is stressing people out? Because people will respond to different elements of it that causes them the stress, that is the demand on them. So for some people it might be feeling out of control because suddenly I've got a whole lot of new tasks to take on and I don't know how to manage the technology, or there's a whole range of things that feel completely you're swimming in it, you're overwhelmed by
drowning,
it.
yeah.
So that's, for some people, that's what this will be. But for other people, it will be more around the threat of COVID as well. And so is it a physical threat to my physical health, to the health of my family, to the health of my church members? Or it might actually be, this situation may not be an issue for them in terms of control or threat, but it might be an issue of hindrance. For me, perhaps it might be that I'm extroverted and I just love to be out there with people, and not to be able to meet with people is the issue for them. That's the stressor for them. So there'll be a number of different elements of this new situation that will cause people stress. And if you're able to help your staff to realise which part of that is stressing them out, then that goes some way to helping them to be more resilient in that, to find ways of coping with that, to come up with new strategies for dealing with it, to be able to pull on resources that you need to solve that particular problem. Because those 3 examples that I gave you have different solutions to what looks like the one problem.
Greg, can you tell me that you listed all those things that you've done? Can you tell me you haven't got that perfectly all the time? Just because it just sounded too intimidating to me. I thought, as you were going through, I thought, oh yeah, I did that a little bit, and I did that a little bit, and then I became non-collaborative, and then I became...
Yeah, years ago, a friend who was planning a church talked about, they started off with a vision statement of something like, we're going to reach Wangaratta for Christ or something. And it was really, really powerful. And they said a year later, they felt like changing it to wandering in the desert with our pants around our ankles. That's pretty much been our motto for ministry.
Right.
We have just fumbled our way forward here. As I've thought about it though, I think one of the things that has stood us well has been initially the relationship that I set up with all of our staff is that I'm firstly their pastor, and that what they get from me first and foremost is love and Bible, and I'm secondarily their boss. And I think now more than ever I'm their pastor and still their boss, but the pastor bit is looming larger, and that's something that I just inherited from a previous boss who we always knew that he loved us. And I think what our staff really need from us now is knowing that we love them and that we'll do anything for them.
Yeah. What's the checklist you want to give us, Kirsty, as senior pastors? We've heard some examples from Greg, but if I haven't done it so far, what do you want me to be making sure that I am doing at this point?
Yeah. Look, I think checking in with your staff, knowing where they're at, is going to be one of the critical things. And I expect by this stage, most people will have come to that point. But making sure that you're actually starting to recognise what is it that is the stressor for the members of your teams, and helping them find ways through that. That's going to be a great way of how you express your love for your people as well, is not trying to add stress onto them because you're stressed out about it, but recognising where you're at, dealing with your things and supporting them through this time as well. So I'd be thinking a bit about that. I'd also be thinking a bit about the sort of language that you're using with your team, because that's a great way of helping your team to be resilient, is starting to reframe for them this situation, that instead of it being a terrible, it's not a disaster, God is still in charge and there is a way forward. So let's just think about what that is. So if you can help your team to reframe this situation as a challenge and one that God is up for, then that will be super helpful for them as well.
What's going to happen next, in terms of the psychology of our teams?
Can anyone answer that at the moment? We're not sure what's going to happen with COVID. Look, people will be tired. People will get tired.
That's where I'm at. I feel tired now.
Yeah. So being aware of that is a great start. Recognising that you will get tired, and that knowing your typical response to exhaustion as well. When you're tired, do you tend to get short with other people? Knowing that you have those sorts of tendencies and being able to manage them so that you don't lay that on your team will be helpful. But then also making sure that you can encourage your team to manage their exhaustion as well. So making sure that they're doing all of those good things around getting plenty of rest, getting good exercise, good diet, good sleep, getting those habits, those basic physical resources in place will be good for them through the course of this. And actually, in amongst all of the isolation, we've got great opportunities to keep up and to establish or improve good the sleep habits that we have, the exercise habits that we have, because our routines have been changed. So once you've got that sort of change already happening, you can actually use it to set up better routines for yourself than you've had in the past. So now is actually a great opportunity to be getting those things into place. And it doesn't stop there. In terms of your physical resources, keep building those, but deeply important, as Greg's already spoken to, is making sure you're continually building your spiritual resources. So we see in the literature there's a great strength that you can draw from in having a spiritual faith, having a relationship with God. And so making sure that you and the members of your team, your congregations, are spending time in the Word, praying, getting close to God and drawing strength from Him will help them as well.
What's your thoughts there, Greg?
I think Kirsty's just nailed it, hasn't it? Being across the board physically, spiritually, emotionally. Thinking about our teams, we've spent quite a bit of time asking about how marriages are going and how children are coping, because the staff member is going to be reflecting those issues. And so in staff meeting, not just asking how are you going, but how is Kim going and how are the boys and those things. We found that that's helped us to identify one of the greatest stresses for our staff.
What are you doing with for us, for example, we've all worked on site up until now. We've all worked from the same office, and it's massively helped over the decade since we built this building, our team collegiality, and then suddenly that's been blown out of the water, and so how are you managing just making the relationships work when we're more likely to annoy each other when we're not seeing each other and we're not hearing about the personal things in the same kind of ways. Yeah.
Yeah, you've just nailed it. Absence does not make the heart grow fonder. It just allows me to think more negative thoughts about you. So we early on talked about some of the dangers that we've had here. And as we've moved to Zoom, we've tried to humanize it by having as much fun with it as possible. So we've increased a lot more fun into staff meetings so that there's this human element to it. There's a lot more cross-teasing, that gentle kind of thing, so that it keeps reminding us that the person is more than just a box on our screen. They're the person we always knew and loved behind it. But yeah, I think I've been a little bit afraid that because absence doesn't make the heart grow fonder, it just makes me grow more suspicious of your motives.
Have you got any tips on those little fun things you were talking about? Yeah, I've run out of my ideas.
Lots and lots of polls. So we got people to talk about what is the one job that you had to do before this that you don't have to do. So you're actually thrilled about COVID. And for me, it was preaching at our mid-year conference, and now we've decided to run it online anyway. So all the work's come back. Lots and lots of polls and those kinds of things, getting people to mess around with backgrounds and teasing their impressions, lots of things that are really just silly, but get everyone laughing. The polls have been really helpful because you can do those things on Zoom. Yeah.
What strategies are you recommending kind of going forward longer term in terms of building resilience that have now come to the fore in this season? Yeah.
Well, certainly building those relationships is going to be core. Knowing who you've got in the team already is a great start. So if you're somebody who has spent a lot of time with team members on site, then that's given you an opportunity to really get to know them and to really understand what makes them tick. So hold on to that. Try and remember those things as well. So if you've got a bunch of extroverts in your team, then those are the sorts of people that are going to be really missing that personal contact. And so they're much more likely to prefer having phone calls, chatting, talking. Whereas if people are more introverted, they'll probably be fine with emails and those sorts of things. So it's thinking about who have I got in my team? How am I actually going to approach them? What's going to work for them? What's going to be helpful for them? So for some people, those Zoom sessions will be absolutely exhausting. And we're already hearing it. People are zoomed out. They've had enough. And there's only so long that you can spend on a screen. So thinking a bit about different ways that you can connect with people in ways that are going to work for them will be helpful.
Greg, what benefits can you see? There's all sorts of things. We're not going to be the same at the end as we were before this all started. And I could ask you the questions about the church as a whole, but I'm just thinking about the staff relationships and how you function as individuals and how we are with God, that this season will be good for us,
Yeah, I've noticed that our staff team has been really willing to make sacrifices to leave behind ministries that they'd spent years building. So we redeployed all of our staff at the beginning into different jobs, and they all walked away from jobs that they'd spent years doing without any complaint. They're those key moments that you talk about in decades to come when you say, remember when people did that? Wasn't that amazing? That sense of sacrifice and willingness. The second thing is this has given us a reason to talk about things like values and a reason to talk about what really matters most to us. I think often we just float along doing what we've always done, being busy, but something like this that disrupts us, forces us to go back to key values, vision and those things. And I think a lot of churches are going to be much sharper. Yeah. So as this whole thing began, we sat down and wrote out a bunch of team values for what we should be in COVID. And I've really noticed our team grab hold of those 5 or 6 values in a way that they hadn't had to think about it beforehand.
Well, just run us through some of those, because, it could be that some of us haven't thought through that as clearly as you have.
Yeah. There were 5 big ones, and all of them have a this, not that. And so our big sense was that we firstly wanted to be godly and Godward attentive rather than impressive. So there's that sense of we want to impress everyone by how good a job we're doing, but we actually want to serve God. That was the first one. The second one was gracious with each other as opposed to defending our turf. Because everyone had to get new at jobs, and we can't see how often people are working. All those things. We wanted to be very gracious. The third one was flexible. That we knew that everyone's job was changing, and that lots of our jobs were actually fairly undefined initially. And so everyone now needed to be flexible. The fourth one was communicating lots rather than sinking into my shell. And then the last one was sacrificial. Now is the time to give up all of my hopes and my dreams and to put my ego and defensiveness aside in order to serve the team. They're things that the team themselves came up with as they saw the threat, and they said, who do we want to be? Who don't we want to be? And it was really helpful. COVID gave us the opportunity to think about that, and I think we'll carry all of those things forward out of this.
How did you, you sound like you've had more staff meeting time than you were having before. Do you know, how have you decided how much time we need to spend as a team talking and reflecting on this stuff?
Yeah, initially we had on the 16th of March, we had an all-day staff meeting, which really set the tone for everything from there. I think for the next 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks after that, we were having 3 staff meetings a week. The department heads were meeting for an hour, and then all of the staff were meeting for another 2 hours. And they certainly weren't all business. There was lots of fun in there. I would preach to the staff every week. We've been working our way through James with me speaking to them. There was a lot of relational stuff, but yeah, we effectively tripled the amount of time staff were spending with each other for that first 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Kirsty, you've got a program to try and help ministers through this. Can you just want to tell us what that is?
Yeah. Sure, yeah. No, I'm working at Macquarie University, and we're delivering a program that is testing how well we can train people in resilience. Mm-hmm. So the research is based on some work that's been done in a number of research trials already, and it's had some positive success with resilience training. So we've seen people who have been through training like this actually grow in their resilience, mm-hmm. Strengthen their resilience. So we've got a trial that's going on at the moment. We've just launched that. People can register to participate in that trial if they would like to. It's going out. We're looking particularly at people who are in Christian ministry. Mm-hmm. So looking to see how we go at strengthen those people in their ministries. Mm.
Kirsty, thanks so much for coming in to talk to us.
It has been a pleasure.
And Greg, thanks for joining us. My guests on The Pastor's Heart have been Greg Lee, the Senior Pastor of Hunter Bible Church in Newcastle, and Kirsty Bucknell, who's an organisational psychologist. And you've been with us on The Pastor's Heart. We'll look forward to seeing you next Tuesday afternoon at 2.